Hi, this is Josh Kulp for Daf Shevui. We are learning Daf Yod of Avodah Zarah. And I wanted to talk a little bit about some of the historical value of the legends we learn on this page. The page is full of interaction between Rabbi Yehuda Nasi, who clearly seems to have had some kind of leadership role among the rabbis, perhaps among the larger Jewish community in the 2nd century CE, and Antoninus, who is described as the Caesar, the head of the Roman Empire. And I want to talk about the old way of dealing with these historical agadot, these historical legends, and perhaps a newer, more critically acceptable way. The old way was to, let's say, not the old scholarly way, not the old way. The old way was to just accept these as historical truth. But the earliest scholars often said, look, we know that it's very unlikely that these are historically accurate. In other words, these are real transcriptions of things that happened. They're legends, but we can look through the legend for the kernel of historical truth. And they would find things like trying to identify which emperor Rebbe may have been referring to, the Talmud refers to. And there are guesses whether there are a lot of emperors whose Marcus Aurelius Antoninus, you can Google it and find a whole list of emperors, and they try to find which one is most likely to have had friendly relationships with the Jews, etc., things like that, which one had problems with the succession, which ones had problems with the Senate. In other words, they try to find the description in the Talmud, the stories in the Talmud that would most accurately fit what we know elsewhere from the lives of these particular emperors. And there are some, let's say, echoes of historical issues that come up in this in these stories. For instance, that Roman emperors were not wasn't bequeathed to one son. That is true for a long list of emperors. The Romans did not practice hereditary empires. Rather, they would adopt sons, and the sons, the adopted sons, which was sort of the choice of the emperor, would become the next emperor. The issue of the definition of what a colony is, the idea that the Romans don't have their own writing system, their own language. These are not just historically accurate, but these are issues that were around in the ancient world. So that was the old system, was to sort of look for what is the historical parts of this that we can glean, and then just say the rest of the story accrued around that. I think a newer and better way of looking at these things is to look not for the historical truth, but to look for the literary truth. It's beyond our scope to do that now, but these are legends that grew over the course of centuries. Remember, we are reading the Babylonian Talmud, a book that wasn't compiled until, let's say, the 5th century. It wasn't really committed to writing until the 5th century. Legends, stories, all sorts of literature develops over the course of time, and newer scholars would do things like, let's look at the Yerushalmi, let's look at earlier Midrashim, let's look at earlier works and see what the earlier, most rudimentary forms of these agadot were, and only then can we try to really figure out what are later accretions, and perhaps some of those early forms of the stories have some kind of historical truth. Perhaps they don't. But before we can try to get any historical truth, the first thing we have to do is look for the literary kernels. This is something I try to do, and Jason Rogoff and I try to do in our books, is to look for the literary sources of these agadot and not just the historical grain that we can find in them. Again, it's beyond the scope. I would say it's safe to say that these are not historical transcripts of records between Rebbe and Antoninus, whoever this emperor might have been. Rather, they're legends that accrued over the course of many, many centuries concerning imagined, I think largely, interactions that a Jewish potentate, such as Rebbe Yehuda Nasi, could have had with somebody, a strong Roman governor, a strong Roman leader, such as Antoninus the emperor.